Peter Perdue from the History Department. It's my pleasure to welcome Juan Cole here this afternoon. And this talk is sponsored by the History faculty and by the Center for International Studies at MIT. As you see on his title slide, he lists himself now as historian and blogger. But I'm still gratified to see that he puts historian first. So many of you may know Juan Cole, the blogger, better than Juan Cole, the historian. I just thought I'd say a little bit about his historical credentials. He got his PhD from UCLA in 1984 in Islamic Studies. Since then, he's been a professor of history at the University of Michigan. Now he's Richard P. Mitchell Distinguished University Professor of History at the University of Michigan. And he's written many books, but his original subject of research was the transnational Shiite religious movements in South Asia and the Middle East. That was long before most Americans, including the American government, had ever heard of Shiites whatsoever. But when 2001 came along, he turned out to be one of the very few knowledgeable experts in the U.S. on this subject. And luckily enough, he turned out also to be a great speaker, a great communicator with audiences, and a really decent guy. And so he's made his name in another sphere, but he hasn't given up on history. I'm very glad to know he's just published another book called Napoleon's Egypt, Invading the Middle East, by Palgrave Macmillan, 2007. Some Americans aren't aware that people invaded the Middle East before us, but Juan is reminding us of that fact. The Middle Easterners have never forgotten it, of course. So he will talk to us today on Iraq's 3 civil wars and is the U.S. relevant to them. Please welcome Juan Cole.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for that warm introduction. Thank you all for coming out on a blustery Monday evening. I want to talk about what I think is going on in Iraq. Of course, it's hard to tell. All war situations are a little bit opaque. But as far as I can tell from reading the Iraqi press in Arabic, there are 3 major struggles for power going on of a political and violent sort. The thing that strikes me and struck me when I started thinking about these 3 major power struggles is how little relevant the United States is. It is a superpower and it is militarily occupying the country, but it appears most frequently to be in the position of going to the parties and saying, hey guys, cut it out, make nice, please. And it's odd. It's odd that it should be so powerless in some ways. But let me try to lay out what I mean, just to remind us what we're thinking about. This is a very schematic map that has caused enormous amounts of trouble and shouldn't be taken too seriously. But it shows Iraq as 3 demographic zones. The Shiites in the south, and that green part is a dense Shiite population, Shiite Muslims, Arabic-speaking. But it doesn't show that Al-Zubair near to Basra is a largely Sunni town of some 400,000. It doesn't show that Baghdad is mixed. So it doesn't show that northern Babel province near to Baghdad is mixed, and so forth. And then it shows the Sunni Arab population as white in the center, west, and a bit north. Again, that's mixed area over to the east towards Iran. Diyala province is highly mixed, and Babel is, and there are Shiites in places like Samarra and so forth. So again, it's misleading a bit. And in the far north, the brown part is showing the Kurdish areas of population. Kurds being not Arabic speakers, but Sunni Muslims, more sort of traditional and mystical in their orientation than the Arab Sunni Muslims, who are more likely to be Salafis or what the press would call fundamentalists. So what are the 3 wars? Well, I'm arguing to you that there's a war for Basra in the Deep South. This is a port city on the Shuttle Arab. It's the body of water where the Tigris and the Euphrates have come together, and they flow together then out to the Persian Gulf. In the old days, it was a major port, Basra, because the ships could come up the Shuttle Arab from the Persian Gulf. So if you had a ship coming from Bombay, it would come up to Basra. But now, of course, the ships are so huge and they displace so much water, and the Shuttle Arab is just not big enough for some of them, that they'll stop instead at a smaller port named Qasr near to Basra. But this is how you get things in and out of Iraq as things now stand. Because if you were an exporter, you could send them out overland through to Jordan going west, but that road is not secure, and Tom Friedman was mugged on it. So your goods may not arrive. And then you could send them north over through Kurdistan to Turkey, but there's been some trouble up there lately, and maybe that's not a good idea for your convoy of goods either. So how would you get things out of Iraq is through Basra and Qasr. It's the south. That's the major port. Iraq, last I checked, was exporting something like 1.8 million barrels a day of petroleum. Where is it exporting it from? Largely from Basra. There is some, about 300,000 barrels a day are going out through the north, but it's a relatively minor amount. So basically, import, export, lifeline, and petroleum, all that stuff is centered in Basra. And if Basra were to collapse, then Iraq collapses. It would be like, putting masking tape over someone's mouth and tying them to the chair and leaving. So I don't see how the government survives. I don't see how anything goes positive in Iraq if Basra collapses. And damned if I can figure out what's causing it not to just altogether collapse. But it's not a good situation down there, as I'll explain. Then there's a war for Baghdad. This is the one that Americans tend to know about because the U.S. troops are in Baghdad, and so it's being fought with, all around our guys, and we get drawn into it from time to time. But what Americans, mostly the American public, when it thinks about this war, they mainly think about attacks on U.S. troops, which are part of that war because the U.S. troops were seen as, by the Sunni Arabs, basically as adjuncts to the Shiite paramilitaries. And they have willy-nilly functioned that way. Most American observers of Iraq wouldn't say that the U.S. is an enabler of the Mahdi army and the Badr Corps paramilitaries of these Shiite fundamentalist parties. But you could make the case that functionally speaking, that's how it's worked out. Because the U.S. has mainly taken on the remnants of the Ba'ath Party, the Salafi jihadis, and other Sunni groups, and has tried to disarm them, tried to kill them, and so it has opened a space for the Shiite paramilitaries to claim territory, engage in ethnic cleansing, and gain territory and power. So that battle between the Sunni Arabs and the Shiite Arabs is going on in Baghdad, is going on in the hinterlands of Baghdad, up to the northeast to Diyala province, and then south to Babel, and so forth. And finally, as if all that weren't enough, there is a war in the north for control of Kirkuk. It used to be called by Saddam Tamim province. Kirkuk province is has the city of Kirkuk in it, and those are very productive oil fields in the old days, at least. I think if they were properly renovated, you could do easy 800,000 barrels a day out of them, or about 1,000 wellheads. They're old fields. These were the ones that made Iraq an oil country back in the 50s and 60s. But the Kirkuk, as it now stands, is one of Iraq's 18 provinces. It is not part of the Kurdistan Regional Authority, which was created by melding 3 northern provinces together into a super province. And however, the Kurdistan Regional Authority wishes to annex Kirkuk to the authority. So these regional governments are kind of super provinces or provincial confederations. And it's just to try to imagine what has happened. Iraq had, in the old days, 18 provinces, but it now has 15 provinces and one regional authority. And it would be as though Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana got together, erased their state borders, elected a joint parliament and a prime minister, and then told Washington if they would like to communicate with any of those states, they need to go through the regional prime minister. And by the way, we're not sending any more money to Washington. This is the kind of thing, and don't even think about keeping federal troops on our soil. So this is what the Kurds have done. They have erased the provincial boundaries. They've created one Kurdistan government. It has its own military. They're giving out visas independent of Baghdad. They're inviting companies in to explore for oil independent of Baghdad. They're the Taiwan of the Middle East. They're an independent country. They just don't say that they are because it would cause a war. And there's a provision in the Iraqi constitution to make more of these provincial confederacies. And some of the Shiites in the south are thinking about along these lines. So there is a war for Kirkuk in the sense that there are Arabs and Turkmen there that don't want to be part of the Kurdistan Regional Authority. The Kurds, on the other hand, are very insistent on having Kirkuk because if Kurdistan has Kirkuk in the long run, it means Kurdistan is a viable country in its own right. And the Turks don't want the Kurds to have Kirkuk and so on and so forth. And the fighting around Kirkuk, not only in Kirkuk city and the rest of the province and places like Hawija, but it extends, I would say, even down to Mosul, a largely Arab city in Nineveh, where 70,000 Kurds have been chased out of Mosul. So there's this ethnic cleansing phenomenon of Arab, Kurdish, and Turkmen fighting. And then there's an international dimension because the Kurdistan Regional Authority, I think its officers mainly would like eventually to be an independent country, and because they are regional expansionists and they would like to add more parts of Iraqi provinces to themselves, part of Diyala, all of Kirkuk, part of Nineveh, and so forth. And they seem to have an eye on Kurdish population regions in Iran and in Turkey, ultimately adding them to themselves. So this is an aggrandizing, regional, ethnically based new state in the Middle East. And it, I think, bears some resemblance to the phenomenon of Serbian nationalism in the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. And we all know what kind of trouble that caused. And I think similar trouble is coming in the north of Iraq. Now, why is the U.S. irrelevant to these wars? Well, there are no U.S. troops in the Deep South, or none to speak of. There are special ops forces go down there and so forth. And so whatever's happening in Basra, the United States is just not very involved in it. And then, you know, the U.S. is always bad-mouthing the Mahdi army of the Shiite cleric Muqtada Sadr, but the Mahdi army basically controls Maysan province, which is nearby to Basra, and they won it in the elections. And then no U.S. troops, to my knowledge, in Kurdistan. I mean, again, there may be a sprinkling here and there. There's a U.S. base out at the airport in Kirkuk. But there are seats down here, by the way. Come on down. I'm not playing Bob Barker when I say there's a U.S. base at Kirkuk. But the U.S. forces are very thin on the ground up north. And the reason for that is partially that in 2003, when the invasion occurred, the 4th Infantry Division was supposed to come through Turkey into northern Iraq, and the Turkish parliament declined to allow that to happen. So the U.S. never really did conquer northern Iraq. And it has a base around Mosul and so forth. But it's thinly populated up there. I don't think there are more than a couple thousand U.S. troops in Mosul, for instance. It's a major city. It's 1.5 million. It's a very important area. So 2 of these struggles are going on virtually without reference to U.S. troops, just because there aren't very many around in those regions. And then one of the struggles is going on with 160,000 U.S. troops present, but apparently unable to do anything about it. because the struggle is going on. With regard to Basra in the south, this is 90% of the Iraqi government budget is coming from petroleum exports, and most of the exports are going through this city. You can see this is the Persian Gulf. That's Qasr, and that's Basra up there. You have to go up the Shuttle Arab to get to it. Now, what's going on in Basra, and who's fighting over what there? This is, again, a city of about 1.5 million. The province itself is larger. There were elections provincial elections in Iraq. Remember the purple thumbs and all of the excitement about those elections in January 2005? Well, a lot of attention was focused on the federal parliamentary elections. But there were also provincial elections, and provincial councils came to power, and these were party lists. So what happened in Basra was that the Basra Provincial Council has 41 members, and 21 of the members of the council supported, in the aftermath of the election, the Islamic Virtue Party. The Islamic Virtue Party follows Ayatollah Mohammad Sadiq al-Sadr, who was killed by Saddam in 1999. And it is one of a number of offshoots of his movement. The one that's most famous is led by Mohammad Sadiq al-Sadr's son, Muqtada al-Sadr, who formed the Mahdi army and so forth. The Islamic Virtue Party does not follow the son. They follow the father, but they have their own leadership. It's led by a man named Ayatollah Muhammad Yaqubi. And there's a whole party apparatus in Basra, and this Islamic Virtue Party is extremely popular among the Shiites of Basra. So it's considered more moderate than Muqtada al-Sadr's branch of the movement, but these things are relative, and I don't see them always acting in a very moderate way. So they won. They control Basra, the Islamic Virtue Party. And they elected as their governor a man named Muhammad Misbah al-Wa'ili. And they have, all the parties in Iraq have paramilitaries, so they have a paramilitary, but they also control the government so that they can induct members of their paramilitary into the police and the local security forces. They control the guards who guard the refineries. This is very good. This is nice work if you can get it. Then the other 20 members of this council support the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. That's led by Abdulaziz al-Hakim, a cleric who was in exile in Iran for 20 years, and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq is an organization, it's an umbrella organization of Shiite parties, which was founded at the suggestion of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1982 in Tehran among Iraqi expatriate Shiites who had fled to Iran from Iraq to escape Saddam's persecution. So ultimately there were some 400,000 Iraqi Shiites in Iran. They have all come back now, but many of them were organized by the Supreme Council. So in Iraq, the Supreme Council is viewed by a lot of people as a kind of proxy for the Iranian government. It is also closely allied with the Bush administration, and for that reason, the Bush administration doesn't talk about it as a proxy of the Iranian government, and it blames all the other Shiites for being pro-Iranian. So there's violence in Basra, and a recent British parliamentary report, because the British were in charge of the 4 provinces of the south, a recent British parliamentary report concluded that there's continuing violence against civilians in Basra. There are reprisals against former members of the Ba'ath Party, and there is a significant, several tens of thousands, a Sunni community in Basra, which has sometimes been targeted by Shiites, who were viewed as having supported Saddam. In some cases, this is correct. Then there was local resistance to the British military presence, and so British jeeps on patrol would get blown up by roadside bombs. There would be sniping at them and so forth. Then there's Marsh Arab tribal mafias. The Marsh Arabs, a population of some 500,000 Iraqis in the south, dwelled in the marshes when the Tigris and Euphrates came south. The water was diverted into lowlands and it made marshes. So these are kind of the bayou Arabs. They made their living from farming and fishing in the marshes, and the marshes are also great for hiding out if you're a criminal. So there's lots of smuggling and illicit things going on down there. And then also guerrillas can hide out there. So when the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq was a guerrilla group and it was based in Iran, it would come across into Iraq through the marshes. It would hit Saddam's guys and then it would go back into the marshes and hide. So Saddam fixed their wagon and drained the marshes. He just displaced thousands and thousands and thousands of people from their livelihood and made them, they basically ended up living in shanty towns around southern Shiite cities as slum dwellers, day laborers and peddlers and so forth. Desperately poor, but still organized by tribe. You know, tribe is a kinship system and it can have political implications. So the Marsh Arabs are strongly tribal. And some of them, having lost their livelihood and anyway already being somewhat involved in things like smuggling, turned to crime. And so South Iraq is riddled with Marsh Arab mafia families. And they weren't allowed by Saddam into Basra in the old days, but the British let them in. And so they fight turf wars with each other and with Shiite militias for control of parts of Basra. And I've interviewed refugees from Basra who've told me horrific stories about Marsh Arab activities that, you know, Don Corleone has nothing on them. And then finally, there's party and militia competition in Basra. There's the Islamic Virtue Party, the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, and the Sadr movement all have paramilitaries. They're all engaged in political competition with one another, but they also do fight turf wars with one another with their militias. So all of that is going on. And over time, Basra's security has gotten worse and worse. So, and it's not just Basra. There has been fighting between these Shiite factions in a number of southern cities, Diwania and Amara, there's Badr Corps elements and Mahdi Army elements fight each other. Now, the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, the party that had been based in Iran, had a paramilitary, they called it the Badr Corps, which was trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And what you have to remember is, from the Bush administration point of view, Iranian Revolutionary Guards bad, Badr Corps good. I can't entirely understand how they're different from one another, but anyway, that's the way it works. So the Badr Corps has been fairly disciplined, has been a de facto ally of the United States in Iraq, and the Supreme Council won many of the provincial elections in the South, and the U.S. military views the elected authorities as the ones it has to support. So basically, the Badr Corps was inducted into the police of most of the southern provinces, and they're fighting the Mahdi Army militia. When you see, you know, Iraqi police engage in gun battle with Mahdi Army elements in Diwania, actually you can think that's the Badr Corps fighting the Mahdi Army. These are two Shiite paramilitaries. And both the Badr Corps and the Mahdi Army have kidnapped people. They run secret courts and prisons in basements. They tie people up. They beat them. They torture them. They extract ransom from them. And the Iraqi government has occasionally fired large numbers of people for being dirty with such activities. But you wonder where they're getting the replacements. By May of 2006, a year and a half ago, Basra was being reported in the Arabic press as being in chaos, dominated by militias and lawless gangs. Automobiles with darkened windows cruise the streets, armed militiamen within. imposing their law on the city. There are tribal fights between Marsh Arab tribes like Al-Bayt Saida and the Banu Mansur. Then there is also fighting between them and the militias. It was announced in May of 2006 by the Basra police that in the previous month there had been 800 assassinations. So, I mean, these guys are whacking each other. And so what are they fighting over? Well, partly it's territory, but why? They're fighting over rights to petroleum smuggling. Once you refine petroleum into gasoline or kerosene, it's a very fungible commodity. And whose truck it arrives in Iran is really not of anybody's interest, or what skiff it goes out into the Persian Gulf on is not of anybody's interest. So it's smuggled. And these guys are all basically on the lookout for one of those, trucks like you see on the road that has the petroleum in them. It's written ExxonMobil on them or something. If that's in Iraq, somebody else will be driving it not too long from now. They grab up this stuff on the streets, or they siphon it off from the refineries, and they sell it. It has been estimated in one report that refined petroleum product smuggling accounts for a loss to the Iraqi government of $2 billion a year in revenues, which is a different way of putting that is that these militias are getting $2 billion a year. That's an income for a militia. You could do something with that if you were ambitious. And the Iraqi government in the summer of 2006 sent down the 10th Army Division. It's one of the 10 new divisions of the Iraqi army to try to restore order in Basra. As far as I can tell, they initially set up some checkpoints downtown and made some feints at disarming some of the militiamen. But then gradually they didn't seem to be at the checkpoints anymore, and we don't hear so much about the 10th Army Division's activities in Basra. I have asked, again, refugees from Basra what's going on, and they don't seem to be around. There was one report I read in the Arabic newspapers, which was sort of sad, that the army is AWOL and declines to come when called, because their experience is that if they shoot at these militiamen and tribespeople, it causes feuds with them, and they come after them to their homes and kill them. So they just don't want anything to do with it. Now, there's a political crisis in Basra as well, because these parties have a local position, then they have a national position. So the local position is obvious, but the national position is that the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq won the federal parliamentary elections, more or less, in January and again in December of 2005. So they were very influential on the appointment of cabinet ministers. In the first transitional government, they were eager to get the Islamic Virtue Party on their side. So they gave the Islamic Virtue Party the Ministry of Petroleum. And that made sense because the Islamic Virtue Party had Basra and already was in kind of the petroleum business and so forth. But what it turned out, it was a bad idea, because from the Islamic Virtue Party's point of view, this is an opportunity for upward integration. I mean, if you control the federal petroleum ministry and you also control Basra, then you really are on the way to controlling Iraq. And the Supreme Council gradually figured this out. And so the next time they had a chance, they put in Hossein Shahrastani as the oil minister. Hossein Shahrastani is a nuclear engineer, very close to Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, so he's in with the religious Shiites, but he's from the Supreme Council side. He says he's a technocrat, but he's coded by the Islamic Virtue Party as Supreme Council. So the Islamic Virtue Party was very, very upset about not having the federal petroleum ministry anymore, and they got in a snit and withdrew from the Shiite coalition, the United Iraqi Alliance, that is led by the Supreme Council. And when they did that, the Supreme Council got in a snit and said, well, if you're not going to be part of our federal government, we're not going to any longer support you regionally. So they engineered a vote of no confidence against the governor of Basra, Muhammad al-Wa'ili, and in the law, unseated him. He lost the vote of no confidence. Some of the members of the governing council that had been supporting him went over to the Supreme Council. But then he declined to step down, even though he lost the vote of no confidence. And sort of his attitude was, you know, I've got a paramilitary and make me. So he seems to still be governor. I can't entirely figure it out myself. He was deposed, and then he appealed to the prime minister, Nouri al-Maliki, who said, well, you know, the law is the law. If you're deposed, you're deposed. And he was accused by al-Wa'ili of interfering in regional affairs, and al-Wa'ili rejected his intervention. And then it's going to some court that's supposed to adjudicate it or something. But I mean, as we speak, I can't see that Basra has a government. Its governor has been deposed, and the council is divided against itself. But the Islamic Virtue Party controls a lot of resources. It controls a lot of the police. It controls the guards of the refineries and so forth, and presumably is continuing to embezzle and to smuggle petroleum. So the party has the kind of resources from having been the dominant party in Basra, such that it can't easily be dislodged, even though by civil law it should have been. So when you hear about Iraq as a democracy and all this sort of thing, I don't think in a democracy I mean, maybe in Chicago, I don't know, this kind of thing goes on. So, and then who had been supplying at least some order in Iraq was the British troops, but they kept getting blown up, and this was unpopular with the British public, and so especially as Tony Blair went out and Gordon Brown came in, they're being drawn down, and there are only 5,500 left. They were in downtown Basra, one of their bases was, but they kept getting mortar fire from these militias because they were interfering with people grabbing these petroleum trucks. So the militias would mortar them. So the neighbors started complaining that, you know, some of the mortars would miss the British and it would fall on somebody's house or a nice hotel. So they said, you know, this is really not a place, downtown Basra, for you to be here if you're going to be attracting mortar fire. And so the British could see the justice of the argument. And so they moved out to the airport recently. However, you know, why it's useful to have 5,500 British troops at Basra airport is not exactly clear, except, you know, for the British government to make the Bushies happy. And so now Brown says, the UK Prime Minister, that they're going to go down to 2,500 by March of next year. And some of the parliamentarians are looking at this and saying, 1.5 million angry Shiites, 2,500 British troops. Is that wise to leave them there like that? You know, the airport can be reached. So there's real concern in the British Parliament that the troop withdrawal is being done in this gradual way for political purposes, but militarily, if you're not going to keep a substantial garrison there that could actually hope to defend itself, you might want to get them out altogether quick. So, you know, things could go badly with them. But then, if they're gone, and it's just like the Iraqi 10th Division, which I remind you, people seem to have trouble finding, and then all of those militias and Marsh Arab mafias fighting each other, what if things go completely to pot in Basra and you can't get the petroleum out anymore? Who's going to pay the government salaries back in Baghdad? Are we going to bring down U.S. troops to do it? I mean, and I can't find anybody who's even thinking about this. It doesn't seem to be on the horizon of anybody's concern that if Basra collapses, Iraq collapses, and Basra is well on its way. So then, turning to the second one, this again is more well known. The Sunni Arabs had been the dominant social class or social group in Iraq until the overthrow of the Ba'ath regime. The Ba'ath regime was supposed to be an Arab nationalist regime, and it had Shiites in it, although you can't find any now who will admit it. But it was dominated at the upper echelons by Sunni Arabs and by the Tikritis around Saddam Hussein. And the U.S. overthrew that government, overthrew that social group, and then it brought its allies into power. So a de-Baathification committee was set up to fire people who had been in the Baath party. And initially, they were only supposed to fire people who had been high level. But they went wild, and they were like firing high school teachers. And you know, in the old days in Iraq, you couldn't get a passport unless you were a member of the Baath party. So if you were a high school teacher, wanted to go, you know, on a summer learning abroad program, you'd have to have a passport. You'd have to apply to join the party. So there are a lot of people who were being fired for, and who had never, you know, like committed any genocides or anything. And they were the only breadwinners in their family because the government was the major source of income. And there's 60% unemployment, and now they're being told drop dead. So this was one of the roots of the insurgency. And it didn't have to be that way. In the fall of 2003, the U.S. military had some polling done. It found 14% of Sunni Arabs were saying in Iraq that it was legitimate to hit U.S. targets. They did this poll again in August of 2006, and over 70% said it's legitimate to hit U.S. targets. So it wasn't the case that we started out with a hostile population that was determined to kill U.S. troops. Over the next 3 years, I think through search and destroy missions and poor policy, the U.S. angered the Sunni Arab population. It's not a unified population. It's in fact very fragmented politically. The Baath Party is a major group. For some reason, there's a conspiracy in our government and the corporate media not to talk about the Baath Party. You almost never see it mentioned. The leader of it, Ibrahim Izzat Duri, is a major figure. He has been a leading figure in the insurgency and has gotten no credit, which seems to suit him just fine because he is a shadowy guerrilla and likes to remain that way. There were traces of him found this week in Tikrit. But the U.S. blamed everything on this Jordanian terrorist, Abu Musab Zarqawi. It was like if there were 80 bombings in the Sunni Arab areas, you know, Zarqawi was rushing around from one to other all that day. And he was coded as al-Qaeda, even though he had never gotten along with bin Laden. And I think the U.S. government decided that Zarqawi was a wonderful plot device because it made it look like the U.S. was fighting al-Qaeda in Iraq instead of fighting Sunni Arab Iraqis, which is what it's really fighting. And there are hardly any al-Qaeda in Iraq. Does anybody there have, like, bin Laden's phone number? I don't think so. But so the Baathists are there, the Arab nationalists, there are tribal groups, and then there are Salafi Sunni revivalists of the Zarqawi type, some Iraqi, some foreign. And the Iraqi Sunni Arabs are very, very unhappy about the new political situation because from their point of view, first of all, they think Iraq is majority Sunni. It's not. They think Iraq is a majority Sunni Arab. The Kurds are mostly Sunni, so you could say it's 40% Sunni. But the Kurds have an alliance with the Shiites right now. So the Sunni Arabs have gotten cut out of the deal. And despite, I think, some efforts to avoid Iraq becoming a tyranny of the majority, it has become one. So the Sunni Arabs will never, ever win any vote in parliament. From now until eternity. They will always lose any important issue they bring up. The Shiites will outvote them. They have some Kurdish allies which allows that to happen in parliament. That's a tyranny of the majority. And, you know, that kind of thing used to happen in 18th century Britain, and it's the reason for which our founding fathers were very, very determined that there not be a tyranny of the majority. They may have gone a little bit too far, but they were worried about that. And in Iraq, that worry was never expressed by anybody. I don't know why, but they have a single-chamber parliament which has a natural majority of Shiites. And so the Sunni Arabs haven't liked anything that Parliament has done, including the new constitution that was made, which tried to enshrine, it failed in the end, it tried to enshrine the power of the Ayatollahs Then it allowed these regional confederacies to be formed. And so the Shiites and the Kurds have set things up so that the regional confederacies have 100% claim on all new natural resource finds. So if you find a Saudi Arabia-style lake of petroleum around Kut in southern Iraq, and they have formed a Shiite regional confederacy, none of that revenue is going to go to the Baghdad central government. And since the Kurds have developed oil in their area, the Shiites have developed fields in their area, if they make these regional confederacies and they put the oil-producing regions into them, the Sunni Arabs end up with the sands around Fallujah. And that's actually a quote from a Sunni Arab politician. So they rejected the Constitution because it allows the formation of these regional confederacies and also gives those confederacies these natural resource rights, which will cut the Sunnis out. Now, one of the key strategies for the Sunni Arab guerrilla movement has been to try to take Baghdad. And in 2004 and 2005, they actually seemed at some points to be on the verge of doing so. Baghdad is at the center of the area where the Shiites and the Sunnis meet. The Shiites in the south coming up, the Sunnis in the north and west coming down. And Baghdad could go either way. Under Saddam, it was basically 50-50. Saddam was uncomfortable with 50-50. He was trying to make it more Sunni. And he planted Sunni families in the southwest of Baghdad, in northern Babel province. He took away land from Shiites and kicked them out and put Sunnis there. So there's kind of Sunnification. And I think similar things happened in Diyala in the northeast. So that area has been contested, and there are population movements, and the Shiite slum dwellers from the rural south have settled in East Baghdad. So the Sunnis, one thing they could do, I mean, they had multiple strategies. One was just to keep hitting the U.S. troops as much as they could to discourage the U.S. public and get the troops out. But another was to leverage their control of the northern and western hinterland of Baghdad so as to push the Shiites out of East Baghdad and make them move south. And so you had this constant attempts to cut off Baghdad from fuel, which were often quite successful. You had drives within Baghdad of ethnic cleansing of Shiites who lived in Sunni Arab neighborhoods, pushing the Shiites east and ultimately hoping to push them out of Baghdad altogether. And getting very near to the Green Zone, even there were plots to take over the Green Zone, which is the center of the center of Baghdad where the U.S. And Iraqi government offices are, surrounded by blast walls and guarded by the Marines. But, and so this is what that particular civil war looks like. If you do a splatter diagram, you can see that it's the area right around Baghdad that's producing this this violence between Sunni Arabs and Shiite Arabs, and Baghdad was ethnically mixed. You can see Sunni and Shiite. Sunni and Shiite neighborhoods. So what turned things around was that in February of 2006, the Shiites had a shrine up in Samarra. It's a Sunni Arab area now, but historically there had been Shiites there. There's a Shiite neighborhood there, and they had a shrine there. Now in Shiite Islam, they have a strong messianic sense. It's like the evangelical Christians who think that Jesus is coming back any moment and will transform the world and so forth. Well, the Shiites believe that their promised one is coming back any moment. He is Muhammad al-Mahdi, and he was the 12th lineal descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. And he disappeared into a supernatural realm as a small child. He may be walking amongst us, but he's in occultation. He's disappeared. He's vanished. And he will, at some point, reveal himself. And when he does, the old world order is over with. And his father and grandfather have a tomb and a shrine in Samarra. So the Sunni Arab guerrillas knew that the Shiites of Iraq have become increasingly millenarian. They have this cult of the 12th Imam. Even the Mahdi army is named for this promised one. The word Mahdi means rightly guided. So they blew up the Samarra shrine, which used to look like that, and now looks like that, actually worse because they blew it up twice. And although they didn't kill anybody when they blew it up, it was the most successful piece of terrorism in modern world history because it just infuriated the Shiites. And they went out on the street with guns looking for Sunnis to kill. Any old Sunni would do. And they went into Sunni mosques and they shot down Sunni preachers. They then would torch the mosque. 4 were burned down. Over 50 were damaged. Maybe 100. And you know, the Sunni Arab guerrilla movement had been trying to provoke the Shiites to do this for some time because they thought you get a civil war going in Iraq, it's too hot for the Americans to stay, the Americans will leave, and then we'll finish off the Shiites and make a coup and come back to power. This was their plan. It was kind of a stupid plan, but this was their plan. And it really explains a lot of the violence in Iraq in the last few years. And so they finally got their wish, right? They finally, the Shiites had restrained themselves, and their Shiite leaders had said, no, don't fall for it, keep public order, we're going to inherit Iraq, and don't take the bait. This is what Grand Ayatollah Sistani was telling the Shiites. He said at one point, he said, I don't care if the Sunnis kill half the Shiites in Iraq. We're not going to take revenge. Not going to have vendettas. But after this, they won't listen to him anymore. And they went after the Sunnis. And wasn't so much in February and March, although there was a lot of that kind of thing, but it grew each month. So by June, July of 2006, you had 2,000 and 3,000 people being killed a day. You started to have death squad activity at night, right under the nose of the U.S. troops. The Iraqi police had to establish a special unit in Baghdad of the corpse patrol. And I don't know, what kind of misbehavior you would have to engage in to get assigned to it. But at dawn every day, you had to go around with a cart looking for corpses of the death squad victims who had been killed and thrown in the street. And these would be people, it's typically Sunni Arabs, who were suspected by the Shiite militias of engaging in insurgent activities, of killing Shiites or whatever. And they would be found, hands bound behind their backs, 1 bullet behind the ear. It's very economical. It's the way mafia does it. None of this stuff where you tie somebody up and hope he dies later on and so forth. That's somebody's dead. You shoot them behind the ear. So, and they were found by the UN, investigated this. They were found to have chemical burns, signs of electrical burns. These people were being tortured and then killed. And they were being tortured because the Shiite militias wanted to get information from them about Sunni Arab insurgent activities. So, I hope you can see this. This is from the New York Times recently. But that is June 2006, and already this stuff had been going on. But that's what Baghdad looked like. The yellow stuff is the Shiites. So they have Sadr City, which, although it's compact, like that little square up there, that's half of Baghdad's population in there. There's very dense slums. And then it has some areas to the southeast, and the Qadamiyya area just across the Tigris. But you can see that the green parts are the mixed, and the Sunni is pink. So you can see it's a mixed city. This is what it looks like now. That yellow stuff is the Shiites. You see how there are hardly any mixed areas left, and the Sunnis are all forced down to Dora or off to the west? In January of 2007, so 6 months after that map, Baghdad was already 65% Shiite. When that's done, November 2007, Iraq is at least 75%. Baghdad is at least 75% Shiite. Now, when you read that the surge has calmed Iraq, that there's been a great success in tamping down violence, what the surge really coincided with was a massive ethnic cleansing of the Sunnis of Baghdad. Baghdad is a Shiite city now. And you can't go with those kinds of numbers, and you figure it's a city of 6.5 million. If you've got a shift of 10% that way, you're talking about 600,000 people being ethnically cleansed. They're killed, they're chased away, they're living in Amman, Jordan, or Damascus now, or with relatives up in Anbar, and so forth. So how has this happened is that the American surge, I believe, and this is a little bit speculative, but it's the only way I can understand it, the American surge concentrated on disarming the Sunni Arab population. Now, if you disarm the Sunni Arabs, and the Shiite militias are still armed, and the Shiite militias want the Sunni Arabs gone, what's going to happen? Now the Sunni Arabs are defenseless. So that's what the surge really was. The surge, from an Iraqi point of view, equaled the ethnic cleansing of the Sunnis of Baghdad. And that's why the Sunni Arabs have withdrawn from the al-Maliki government, and that's why the people in Al-Anbar province and so forth are very happy that they have done so, because they said the al-Maliki government, in cahoots with the Americans, has presided over the end of Sunni Baghdad. I just said all that. And finally, I just want to finish up with the Kurdish issue, which is complex, and I've already said most of what I want to say about it. But that's sort of the demographic map of where the Kurds live. And you can see that they're not actually just in that Kurdistan Regional Authority region. They stretch into Turkey. They stretch down to Diyala province and over into Iran. There are even some in the Caucasus. There are 2 million in Syria. So if you really got this Kurdistan thing going as a new state in the region, and it was ethnically based, and it got all of the Kurds inside it, you're dismembering like 5 countries. And there's going to be trouble over that. And even just dismembering Iraq is going to cause trouble. And even just annexing large numbers of Sunni Arabs, Shiite and Sunni Turkmen into the Kurdistan Regional Authority, which is what happens if they grab Kirkuk, is going to cause a lot of trouble. Now, not only are they trying to get Kirkuk, and there's Kirkuk there, but they also have their eye on Mosul, which is a Sunni Arab city of about 80% of Sunni Arab. And they've started giving safe haven to the Kurdish Workers' Party guerrillas. This is a radical, almost Pol Pot style movement of the 80s and 90s in southeastern Turkey. And, you know, you sympathize with the Kurds. They weren't treated well in Turkey. Turkey has this very strong kind of monochrome Turkish nationalism, so that they would even deny there are any Kurds. They wouldn't let the Kurds have newspapers. But they, and then the Kurds lived in the southwest, which is the poorest part of Turkey, and so forth. So they felt marginalized, and some of them joined this guerrilla movement. The guerrilla movement, I don't know, is extremely violent, and although the Turkish government was violent in putting it down as well, the guerrilla movement would kill local Kurds for what they called collaboration. So it killed almost as many Kurds, I think, as the Turkish government did. So this was a kind of war in southwestern Turkey all through the late, through the 80s and 90s, which kind of had settled down because the leader of it, Öcalan, was captured, and then a lot of Kurds have left southwest and are guest workers in, well, not guest workers, but they're workers in Istanbul and elsewhere in the light textile industry. And there's not evidence in the polling. The political science scientists have looked at Kurdish voting patterns. Not evidence in Turkey of a pan-Kurdish national sentiment. They tend to vote just like the people around them. They all speak fluent Turkish. They're binational in some ways, and their binationality is denied in important respects by the Turkish state. But there's been a little bit of opening to that. And anyway, the movement had settled down. But there were still like diehard fighters, about 5,000 or so, that wouldn't give up. And now the Kurdistan Regional Authority under Masoud Barzani in Iraq is giving them safe harbor. So as far as I can tell, they're going over and killing Turkish troops and then coming back and hiding in Iraq. And Turkey is a NATO ally of the United States. And in September alone, I think the PKK guerrillas killed 28 Turkish troops. Can you imagine what would happen if some guerrilla group came over the border into the United States from Tijuana and killed 28 U.S. troops? So the Turks want to invade. And so you've got a situation where a NATO ally wants to invade the country that we are militarily occupying in order to kill terrorists that we consider terrorists in the State Department who are being coddled by our main ally in Iraqi politics, which is the Iraqi Kurds. So I don't have to go on at great length about that. You can see what a mess it is. So there are the three civil wars, and there are the irrelevance of the United States, because I don't see that it's been able to do anything about any of the three, and I don't see how this thing is going well. Thank you. Well, we'll take questions. Yes?
Thank you so much for the lecture, but unfortunately I have missed most of it.
Oh, can you come? You wanted them to come up to the mic? Oh, there's a mic there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the lecture, but unfortunately I lost most of it. But I have suffered until I could come here. I have just come from Iraq, and I come from Mosul, and I am Arab Sunni. But what I have heard from what you said, actually I can give you more than 90% truth of what you are saying. And the situation of Mosul, especially my town or my city, it is a city actually. I was actually terrified when I came here, and I met actually in a special, I met Joe Biden. Yeah. I actually asked about him, and I reached him, and I told him, please, do not support the idea of the partition of Iraq. He told me why. I told him, you should not give Mosul to the Kurds, because we are in Mosul, Arab Sunni, 85%. How can you give our land to the Kurdish area? The Kurdish in Mosul are not more than 5%. And we are in Mosul, for instance, we are mixed. My brother-in-law is Kurdish, and we are Arab Sunni. And they never want to go to the Kurdish area. They never want to be an independent state. How can they create Mosul as a Kurdish area and join Mosul to be part of the Kurdistan, which Masoud and Jalal wants to be independent? And believe me, I am a teacher and I am a professor at the University of Mosul, and I was teaching till I came at the Kurdistan universities, and my students got their PhD and MA certificates, and they became professors. So I am very well aware of what's going on also in Kurdistan. I swear, and I do not want to swear, that the Kurdish people do not want their leaders, just like us when we did not want Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was bad and was dictator. But believe me, now we are saying God bless him in his grave. Why? Because when I was a student at Baghdad University, I was a PhD student from 1919 to 2003. Even my PhD, I got my PhD under the fire of the American and the Iraqi army after the fall of Baghdad in 2003 in June. But at that time, I used to travel with my brother at 2 o'clock in the night. And now in Mosul, till I came at 4 o'clock afternoon, we cannot get out of the house. Believe me, our life is hellish. You cannot imagine. People there cannot laugh. People there cannot eat. People there cannot sleep. And not only that, but the Iraqi army, the Iraqi army, you have no idea what Bremer did to Iraq when he became the ruler. Firstly, he humiliated the Iraqi army, which was fighting for the safety of Iraq. It was not fighting for Saddam. It was fighting for the safety of Iraq. And now, even when I am a thinker in Iraq, I was saying that, or I was grudging that Saddam made us enter a war, which is a war of attrition with Iran. But now we started to understand that Iran was real enemy for us, and Saddam was right when he was combating Iran, and we have understood what is Iran now. Iran now and America, and we cannot imagine that America is not fully aware of what Iran is doing in Iraq. Now, in my university, my dearest friend, who was the chair of the Department of Translation, she was assassinated only because she was the chair of the translation department, because her department gives translators to the occupation. Yeah. And not only that, but many scholars were assassinated. Why this? Because we know they were assassinated by Iran and by other troops or by other forces which are invisible. So even I told those whom I met ever since I came here, I told them, please give respect to the Iraqi army. Please give them salaries. Please give them money, because they are now starving to death. And all that they had at Saddam's time of money, of anything, now it has finished. And they have only one road to go to. That is to resistance. To resistance. Nothing. Iraq now is unlivable, believe me. And my family is there. And every day I am in contact with them. Until this moment, people are being slain. Scholars are being slain. And not only that, but we have started to realize that the Kurdish forces stand behind some of the assassinations of the scholars, of the leaders. I can tell you that most of the pilots who fought in the Iraq war, or who used to go to bomb Iran, now are assassinated by Iran. No one pilot now is left. Even the officers, the big officers of the Iraqi army. So this is the situation in Iraq. America should listen to us. America should, if I am always asked what we should do, we are now in the quagmire. That is true. Iraq has become a quagmire, and there is no way out of it. I advise America to get out of Iraq. This moment, not later. And thank you so much.
Would you come with me to the offices of the National Review and explain to them about how it's not calm and I'm 90% right? I don't think they think that.
One might have a suspicion that and I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but the attack on the mosque, who would benefit most from a war between Shia and Sunni and aggravating it? And I think you had on your slide that the U.S. ambassador had been blamed. I wonder if you could elaborate on what you meant by that, and to what extent, if any, you think there is any plausible case to be made for some of this violence being instigated by, and you know, I confess it's even occurred to me that Israeli intelligence may have an interest in stirring it up. The United States may or may not. Who knows? And I don't mean to suggest, well, that people themselves aren't plenty ready to engage in it. But I'd also like you to say, so given this, you know, the overview that you've laid out, and I'm sure there are CIA briefings like this all the time, you know, ongoing. What do you think the United States policy currently is, and where do you think it's heading, given that I think they probably have some understanding, even if they're not willing to admit it publicly, of the dire nature of the situation?
Well, certainly the U.S. Officer Corps knows exactly what's going on in Iraq. No, I don't think the United States had anything to do with the bombing of the Samarra Shrine. The Ba'athis may have done it, and the Salafi jihadis, you know, are extreme iconoclasts, so they don't believe that you should make any image or graven idol that has anything to do with the divine. So a Shiite shrine just drives Wahhabis up the wall, and in 1802, Sunni Wahhabis came up from Saudi Arabia and attacked the shrine of Hussein in Karbala in Iraq. So the Salafi jihadis might have done it, the Ba'athis might have done it, but it was, I believe, an act of the Sunni resistance, and it was designed to throw the country into greater turmoil in hopes that it would make it too hot for the Americans to stay. Well, the American policy in the last 8 months has been the troop escalation, which the argument was made that the Iraqi government is not functioning well, let us say, at the federal level, and you know, it's hard to get a quorum in Parliament because they have to come into the green zone. Most of them don't live there, and they're searched by the Marines, and sometimes they have to wait to get in which case they can be assassinated while they're waiting. Their Parliament building has been bombed inside the green zone, and most of them, as far as I can tell, are afraid to come to Parliament. And many live abroad. Some live in London and some live in Amman, so it makes it hard to get back from meetings. And then within the ones who do show up are fighting with each other all the time. There's a Sunni fundamentalist bloc. There are several Shiite blocs, and the Kurds, and they don't agree on most things. Aside from the Constitution, which never did really receive a voice vote that was counted properly, and which was then passed in national referendum, I can't think of any significant legislation that the Iraqi parliament has passed. Things have been reported out to it from the cabinet, but it hasn't been an active legislature. Not having a quorum makes it hard to pass things, but so they're fighting with each other all the time. So the idea was, well, one of the reasons they're fighting with each other all the time is the bombs going off in the capital all the time, Shiite markets being hit by Sunni guerrillas, Sunnis being ethnically cleansed by Mahdi militia, and so forth, so that if you could reduce the violence in the capital, you could create a calm and a political atmosphere in which then people might be able to sit across from the table and come to some kind of political compromise. That was what was advertised as the basis of the troop escalation. So, you know, from one point of view, it has worked in the sense that the Corpse Patrol is only finding 4 or 5 bodies a day anymore, and that kind of massive ethnic violence is not happening so much. There are fewer bombings, although there are not no bombings. There are still mortar strikes. In fact, the Green Zone regularly takes mortar fire. And so it's a dangerous city still. And the last statistic I saw suggests there are about 400 attacks a month in Baghdad. And so if I came to you and I said, how would you like to move to a city where there are only 400 attacks a month, you might not be so eager. But of course, that's down from 1,000 attacks a month or something. So, I mean, from the U.S. military's point of view, if you're counting statistics, things are much improved. And of course, how many people die a month from political violence is actually contentious, because the Iraqi government and Ministry of Health statistics are suspicious. Iraq body count still thinks 1,100 died last month. The Iraqi government and the U.S. military is saying 600 or something. Well, that's good relative to what had been going on before, but it's not good in absolute terms. So, but the idea was that you get down the violence, and then people will make a political compromise. So, A, the violence hasn't entirely been gotten down. B, getting down the violence mainly seems to have consisted of making the Sunni Arabs vulnerable to being ethnically cleansed in Baghdad, which is not actually a kind of situation which would make people more likely to compromise. If you go to the Sunni Arabs and say, well, you know, you're not being killed in the same numbers anymore, and they say, well, that's because we're not there anymore, this is not going to produce a good feeling. And then the whole premise of the thing, that they're not able to compromise politically mainly because of the violence, may not have been true in the first place. So there has been some relative success in reduction of violence. That's the U.S. policy, and it has worked to some extent. It has worked artificially. Blast walls have been put around Adamiyah, which was a Tony shopping area. So, like, there's not so much shopping there because you can't get past the blast walls. No bombs going off, but also shopkeepers not moving any merchandise. Very high rates of unemployment as a result. Or a city like Fallujah, all this summer from May until September, there was no private vehicular traffic. You had to just walk in Fallujah. It's a city of some 200,000. So, yeah, obviously, if you don't let the vehicle circulate, there can't be car bombs. So you reduce the incidence of violence and deaths from violence and so forth. But, you know, a lot of these measures that have been taken are artificial and couldn't possibly last very long. I mean, eventually people will drive, and when they drive, then you can have car bombs again, and won't the car bombs then come back? And the evidence is they do. So some of the reduction in violence is apparent and not real. But in any case, the main reason for the troop escalation was to produce political compromise, and that hasn't worked at all. In fact, since the troop escalation began last March, the Iraqi government has increasingly collapsed. Two major factions of Shiites withdrew from al-Maliki's government, then the Sunni Arabs withdrew, and then the secular Shiites withdrew. So, you know, the idea was he would have some Sunni Arabs with him in his parliament and in his cabinet, and then he would reach out to the rest of the Sunni Arabs when things were calmer. Instead, he's lost the Sunni Arabs that he had with him, and there's no evidence that he's brought any significant numbers into the government. So, you know, there's an over-concentration in the American press on the reduction in casualties, as if that's the only important datum to come out of Iran. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well,
I was surprised during your presentation, just like the press or the government briefings, the word collaborator was missing. If you look at the situation in Iraq, there is an overwhelmingly powerful foreign occupation. And the local Iraqis with pride or who love their country, who oppose the occupation, the only thing they can do is to kill each other. That's the only way of getting rid of the occupation, because they're going to cut the supply lines, they're going to kill the police force, or whoever accepts green American dollars from the foreign occupiers. Of course, they're going to be seeing them as collaborators. Isn't that true that there are two different pictures? One, struggle or killing and fighting violence, increased violence under occupation, and when the occupation leaves, it will be a totally different picture. Would you agree?
well, I agree that that is an accurate description of how the guerrillas would look at it. I mean, I try to avoid words like collaborator or resistance or whatever, because I think they're emotionally charged. I'm trying to, as far as I can, give a social science accounting of what's going on. But what you said is certainly how the guerrilla movement would view the situation.
Dr. Cole, thank you for a wonderful talk. Are there any Shiite parties in Iraq that actually want an independent Iraq? They don't want Iran meddling. They don't want to be a part of Iran or an extended Iran. Yes, they want to be Shiite, but they want to be a separate country. Can you talk about that?
Okay, so I don't think there are any Shiite parties in Iraq that want to be an appendage of Iran. I would turn it around. The Supreme Council has a strong alliance with Tehran, but it's not a puppet. And if it were a puppet, it wouldn't be going and having barbecues with George Bush in the White House. But the Sadr movement is mostly these Shiite working class kids in the slums of the Shiite southern cities, and they mostly don't like Iran very much. They're Iraqi nativists, and Muqtada Sadr is always complaining about Persian influence on Iraqi Shiism and so forth. And then there are people to the right of that movement. There's a man named Sheikh Mahmoud al-Hassani al-Sarki, who leads an offshoot of the Sadr movement that doesn't recognize Muqtada, which is virulently anti-Iranian and actually burned down the Iranian consulate in Basra. I would say that most Iraqi Shiites are not eager for Iranian dominance and are Iraqi nationalists. And remember that of the million-man army that fought Iran in the 1980s, the majority were Iraqi Shiite conscripts, and they were risking their lives to keep the Iranians from taking over their country. I think that there are figures in Iraqi Shiism that are more or less willing to have a close cooperation with Iran, which see Iran as an ally, that will take money and war material from Iran. I think the Supreme Council is probably the leader in that regard, but there are apparently some members of the Sadr movement who formed what are called special groups, Majami' Khasa, which seem to get training and some weaponry from Iran as well. But I think overall it's a relatively minor part of the Shiite spectrum that's close to Iran. Most Iraqis are fairly nationalistic and want their independence. The one other thing to say is that there are Iraqi Shiite middle-class people who view Iran as a savior in an economic sense. Because, for instance, the likelihood is if things settle down in Iraq, that millions of Iranians will be coming to Iraq every year on religious pilgrimage to Najaf and Karbala, and this is billions of dollars. And so the shopkeepers in Najaf are fit to be tied, because if only things would be calm, they'd be rich now. And the Iranians are helping them to make an airport near Najaf so the pilgrims can come straight. But that kind of, cooperation and economic aspirations and so forth is not the same as accepting political dominance from them. We should go where the mic is, yes.
Thank you very much for really interesting talk. But it seems to me that the discussion right now is, well, should there be a foreign presence there or not, or should we get out? Is it even possible to get out? I mean, Time Magazine brought, like a couple of months ago, a very interesting article about just the logistics. And now in the light of American presidential elections, I mean, is it even politically possible to do anything in the next year and a half?
It's a very good question. No, I don't expect anything significant to happen in the next year and a half with regard to the U.S. troop presence. I think the escalation of 30,000, what was called the surge, it's a euphemism. It shouldn't be used. It's a troop escalation. The Republican Party doesn't want us to call it that. We should insist on calling it that. That's what it is. So I don't know. It's nice for the headline writers because there's less letters. But that escalation of 30,000 will be taken back out. In fact, 5,000 are coming out this month that were put in. And probably by July, we'll be back down to about 130,000. And I expect in January of 2009, when the new president takes the oath of office, there'll still be something on that order. So I think this president is determined to keep the troops there. I don't think there's anything anybody can do about it. But what I'm trying to argue to you today is that it doesn't seem to me to be entirely relevant to these big struggles that are going on. Because whether they're, I mean, the fights are going to go on in Basra, the fights are going to go on around Kurdistan, and apparently the fights have been going on in Baghdad under our noses. So that the U.S. continued presence there is going to produce a settlement of these civil wars seems to me very unlikely. So, I mean, the answer is yes and no. Yes, they will stay. No, it probably won't make much difference.
Thank you also for your talk, Dr. Cole. Building off that question, putting aside the politics, if you were put in charge of U.S. policy today, which would be a great thing, what would you do?
Well, Muqtada Sadr, the sort of fiery young cleric, established this Mahdi army in the summer of 2003, and it went on to cause a lot of trouble, and eventually got into big firefights with the Marines. And in the midst of the firefights, Muqtada went to Grand Ayatollah Sistani, the sage old man, and said, if you give the order, I'll dissolve the militia. It's causing trouble for the Shiites. And Sistani's response was, well, you didn't ask me before you founded it. Why are you asking me now? So I mean, this situation in Iraq has gotten beyond policy. I mean, that was one of the points of my talk, is that, people sat down last year this time and planned out this troop surge, intending that it produce certain results. They didn't intend to see Baghdad ethnically cleansed of its Sunnis. I mean, the policy backfired on them. They still don't admit that that's what's happened. Any policy I sat down and made at this point is also going to backfire. And the situation is out of control. When you have 3 civil wars going on, it's just unpredictable. You need somebody who's good at chaos theory. My own experience in these things was formed in the Lebanese Civil War, where I lived in Lebanon in the early years of that war. But what I found was that people form these neighborhood militias and they fight with each other for a purpose. I mean, they're gaining something from the fighting, territory or wealth or whatever. And if you do that for a decade, the marginal improvement that you could get in your situation from further fighting gradually decreases. And ultimately, that's why the militias of Lebanon disarmed. Everybody but Hezbollah laid down their arms because they were very unlikely to get much more than they already had by continuing fighting. In fact, they were getting to the point where they were losing things. So my best guess is that the Iraqis will fight each other for a few more years, and then they'll get tired of it. That's not much of a policy, but that's my expectation. And I could be wrong, because there's 2 possibilities. What I'm talking about is where you fight to a stalemate. That's, I believe, what happened in Lebanon. You could fight to a conclusion, in which case there are no Sunnis in Baghdad. There are all the Supreme Council people in Basra are taken out and shot, and so forth. That's a longer kind of struggle, and pursuing it could last a long time. So I'm guessing they'll fight to a stalemate, but I could be wrong. They could fight to a conclusion, and if they fight to a conclusion, then it seems to me it results in the partition of the country.
I have the mic. I enjoyed your talk. Could you comment on, you didn't seem to mention Al-Qaeda in your analysis at all, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Could you comment on reports that Howard Hunt had been granted oil interests in Kurdistan? And what do you see as the likelihood that the al-Maliki government will be replaced by a different, more even-handed regime?
Okay. That's 3 questions. First of all, the reason I don't talk about al-Qaeda in Iraq is that I think it's a misnomer. There are groups in Iraq that call themselves al-Qaeda, but it's like, I'm a bogeyman, I'm big, I'm mean, and you should be afraid of me. It doesn't have any operational implications that they call themselves al-Qaeda. There may be a handful of people who've come in from Waziristan or something who had a conversation with Ayman al-Zawahiri, but it just doesn't amount to very much. And the U.S. military has 24,000 Iraqis in custody. Altogether, there are 60,000 people incarcerated in Iraq for political crimes. This is enormous. It's only a country of 25 million or 27 million. So it's a very significant percentage that are incarcerated. Of the 24,000 that are incarcerated by the United States, on the order of 17,000 are Sunni Arabs. The rest are Shiites. And the foreign jihadis of the sort that call themselves al-Qaeda, I think 149. I conclude that al-Qaeda is not important, and that what's really going on is the U.S. military is fighting Iraqis and doesn't want to say so, so then they call them al-Qaeda. I've noticed in the press now, every time there's a firefight in Samara or someplace, the U.S. troops killed 14 al-Qaeda fighters. Well, what, did they kite the bodies? Do they look through the pockets? Do they have pictures of Osama bin Laden and lockets around their neck? What does it mean that they're al-Qaeda? I mean, they're Iraqis, they're Sunnis, they're calling them al-Qaeda. And there is a group called the Islamic State of Iraq, which actually does hold territory and is a guerrilla group. And its leaders praise al-Qaeda and say that they're part of al-Qaeda. But again, this is a rhetorical strategy in Iraq. And those are the ones that are declining in favor of the awakening councils. So that's one. The second thing about Hunt, yes, the Hunt oil is losing its bids in Yemen. In the old days, it would have been sunk. The Hunts are very good friends of the Bushes, and they have been saved by the possibility of some bids in Iraqi Kurdistan, which are being let without the permission of the Baghdad central government. So you have George W. Bush coming out in front of the cameras and saying, we support the federal government of Iraq, and you have his buddies and Dick Cheney behind the scenes getting up these oil contracts that don't have reference to the government in Iraq, in Baghdad, and which are going straight to the Kurds. And this is a violation of U.S. policy, but it's happening. And then what was the third?
The likelihood that the al-Maliki government would be replaced by a more promising group.
Well, the problem is the way the Constitution is worded. The largest bloc in Parliament gets to form the government. So the largest bloc in Parliament now and tomorrow and forever will be the Shiites. And so if you got rid of al-Maliki, they would just elect somebody else like al-Maliki. I mean, we've already gone through that. They didn't like Joffrey, who was from the Dawa party, and they got rid of him, and so then they elected al-Maliki. But the only way you would get real change is if you went back to the polls, if there was new parliamentary elections. Now, in most parliamentary systems, if the government loses a vote of no confidence, they're general elections. But general elections are hard to hold in Iraq because of, like, the bombs. And so they put in the Constitution that if the government falls, you just have another vote of Parliament. So nothing necessarily has changed in Parliament. So 55 deputies in Parliament could call a vote of no confidence for al-Maliki, and I think he'd lose at this point. But then the president would be forced by the Constitution to go back to al-Maliki's coalition, the United Iraqi Alliance, and ask them to form a new government. So you'd get somebody very like al-Maliki. Yeah.
There were all of these groups that had withdrawn their support from the...
Well, they withdrew their support from the al-Maliki government, but they're still Shiites, and they would be counted in the bloc. In fact, most of them have not said that they formally severed themselves from the main bloc. But you only have to have the largest bloc in Parliament. So the Sunnis depends upon how you count. But there are 44 in the Iraqi Accord Front and 11 in the National Dialogue Council. So say 55. And then the Kurds have about 58 if you count the 5 Islamists. And then the Shiites are always going to have more than that. So there's nothing you could do about it. If you unseated Maliki, you'd just get a Maliki lookalike. And it would take 7-8 months to negotiate the new government because they give out the ministries in accordance with the parties and make favors. And so you just have gridlock with regard to politics for a long time. And I can't see in whose benefit it would be to provoke that situation. You certainly wouldn't get a quick new situation.
I'd like to know what's your estimate of the social and economic destabilization and weight onto surrounding countries created by the wars.
The question about the social and economic impact of the Iraq War on neighboring countries is a vivid one. The estimates are 2.2 million Iraqis abroad, of which at least half have been displaced by this war. There were people who had been displaced by Saddam before. Probably 800,000 in Jordan, 1.2 million in Syria, and then there are smaller communities in Lebanon and Egypt. Those Iraqis in Jordan and Syria, and remember, Jordan's population is something like 5.8 million. So 800,000 is a very large proportion of the people resident in Jordan right now. It's like 13% or so. And Syria's population, 19 million, so 1.2 million is a good chunk. They have survived so far on stipends from the United Nations Relief Organization, UNHCR, and that money is running out. It may be gone by the end of the year. The Jordanian and Syrian government do not have the resources to essentially put these Iraqi refugees on welfare. The Syrian government doesn't even have the resources to admit them to its schools, the Iraqi refugees in Syria are not having their children schooled. So there is danger of severe malnutrition. There's danger of a lost generation. There's danger of social turmoil. And it's not very unclear where the money is going to come from to take care of all these people. The situation in Jordan doesn't seem to be quite as dire. I think possibly because some of the Iraqi refugees in Jordan are from Dulaim and other tribes that exist in the Jordanian side, and probably the tribal networks are kicking in some help. But there are severe social problems of pauperism, there's potential for homelessness, there's widespread forcing of girls into prostitution. So it is a massive calamity, probably the worst calamity of displacement since 1948, when the Palestinians were displaced from Palestine. And we all know how well that went afterwards. So a lot of us are worried where this thing is going. I don't think it's a long-term problem because obviously Iraq is potentially a very rich country. If you were exporting 2 million barrels a day at $100 a barrel, you could take care of a lot of people. So I think they'll eventually come back. And I think things in the medium to long term will be all right. But we're facing a crunch. We're facing a crisis of how to get through 2008 for these refugees. And I personally believe, and I wish you all would write your congressmen and senators about this, that the U.S. Congress has a responsibility for kicking in some large amounts of money to those refugees because they have been displaced in some large part by our war. And we are taking no responsibility for them. We were on the verge of passing another big supplemental of $100 billion for war material, and we should be able to find $1 billion in there for taking care of these refugees. And if we don't, the contribution of this problem to further destabilization of the region could be immense.